The alarm buzzed at 4:45 a.m., breaking the silence inside a cramped, one-bedroom flat nestled between rows of weather-beaten houses in the industrial outskirts of a northern port city. The walls were thin, the heater inconsistent, and the rent late again, but Nora Everhart didn't complain. Not aloud. At 24, Nora had become the provider, protector, and dreamer of her small family, all since the day the world shifted under her feet. Her father had passed from lung disease 2 winters ago, and her mother had succumbed to grief and a failing heart not long after. That left her with Quinn, her 14-year-old brother, moody and brilliant, the only thing in the world she loved without question. Before the sun painted the sky in streaks of copper and blue, Nora had already brewed bitter black tea, fried 2 eggs, and packed her rickety bike with an insulated box for food deliveries. She left a note for Quinn on the chipped table by the window. Porridge in the pot. Try to eat before noon. Love you endlessly. Then she was off. The wind was sharp as she pedaled across cracked concrete roads toward the city. Her delivery app buzzed in her coat pocket as orders began piling in, smoothies, bagels, breakfast trays for office staff. Her legs burned from effort, and the straps of her helmet dug into her skin, but she smiled at each drop-off, thanked each customer, and cycled on. After hours of riding and navigating city alleys, Nora slipped into her mid-morning shift as a part-time clinical intern at Portview General Hospital. Still in uniform, she changed in the staff bathroom, scrubbing the grease from her hands and smoothing her brown curls back into a bun. Her scrubs didn't quite fit, they were a size too big, second-hand, but she wore them like armor. In the lecture room, she absorbed everything. Anatomy, triage, emergency intake protocols. The professor spoke quickly, but Nora's mind was sharper than her fatigue. She scribbled notes, highlighted passages, and ignored the growling of her stomach. She had no time to eat. No money to waste. Every second mattered. By 3:30 p.m., she was back on her bike. Another round of food orders. The box on her back now felt like part of her spine. And by 6 p.m., she was home. Quinn was sitting cross-legged on the floor, eyes glued to a sci-fi movie playing on the flickering television. His hair was tousled, and his hoodie sleeves were frayed at the cuffs. He barely looked up when she entered. "Hey," Nora said, shutting her windbreaker and dropping her delivery bag like a sack of rocks. "Hey," he muttered. The porridge was okay. "That's high praise coming from you." They both cracked half a smile. Later, as she boiled lentils and sliced onions for dinner, Nora studied flashcards pinned to the kitchen wall. Each fact she memorized brought her closer to becoming a certified medical assistant, a stepping stone toward nursing school. A dream she'd held since her father's last breath, when no one but a tired nurse had looked him in the eyes. "You're working too much," Quinn said over the clatter of spoons. "You didn't have to deliver food after class." "I kind of did," she replied gently. "We have bills. You like having lights, right?" He rolled his eyes but didn't argue. After dinner, they walked to the docks, as they often did on clear nights. The salty air was sharp, but Nora loved the openness of the sea. Quinn kicked pebbles into the surf while she watched the boats, their lights blinking like distant stars. "School's okay," he said, unprompted. "I flunked that math quiz though. We'll fix it," she promised. "Sunday night. We'll go over everything. Deal?" Quinn hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Deal." Her chest warmed at his smile, small but real. She missed that smile. Missed the boy he had been before grief had aged him, the way it had aged her. Later that night, Nora slipped into her second shift, helping a reclusive widow named Agnes who lived on the second floor of an old Victorian house near downtown. Agnes was 82, feisty, and precise. She liked her tea brewed exactly 4 minutes and her slippers placed at a 45-degree angle beside her reading chair. But more than anything, Agnes liked Nora. "You've got hands like a nurse," she'd said more than once. "Steady. Calm. That's rare." Tonight, as Nora massaged her aching feet and helped her organize pills, Agnes spoke softly. "Do you know what you remind me of?" Nora smiled. "A younger you?" "Exactly." The old woman chuckled. "I was stubborn too. Thought I could carry the world on my shoulders and still smile. But remember this, dear, just because you're carrying it well doesn't mean it's not heavy. Nora blinked, caught off guard by the truth of it. You deserve rest, Nora, Agnes added gently. Not just sleep. Rest. She nodded, tears burning at the edges of her vision. Maybe one day. That night, when she got home close to midnight, Quinn was asleep on the couch, a half-eaten bowl of cereal on the table. Nora covered him with a blanket, brushing his hair from his forehead. Her arms ached. Her back throbbed. But her heart? Her heart was full. She whispered into the darkness, I'll get us out of this. I swear it. In the silence, only the sound of the sea in the distance replied. But deep down, she believed it. No matter how long the night. No matter how heavy the burden. Tomorrow, she'd rise again, just like the tide. Sunday mornings were supposed to be sacred, slow, quiet, and filled with the smell of pancakes. But for Nora Everhart, they were just another race against the clock. Her alarm chimed at 5:30 a.m., a compromise from the usual 4:45. She allowed herself 10 extra minutes to lie in bed, breathing in the brief stillness of the apartment before the world demanded more from her. Quinn was still asleep in the bunk they shared, the top for him, the bottom for her. The overhead fan hummed, spinning slowly above the frayed ceiling. Nora quietly slipped out from beneath her blanket, trying not to wake her brother. Her body protested every movement, muscles tight from the week of work, but she moved with practiced efficiency, wash face, brush teeth, start the kettle. A note was left on the stove again, in the same place as always. Pancakes in the fridge. Heat and devour. Sunday night, math squad. Love, in, her life had become a patchwork of rituals. Notes, early mornings, late nights, and brief moments of silence between them. But today, something felt different, heavier. By mid-morning, she was out on her usual route, navigating alleyways with food deliveries on her creaky bicycle. The weather was overcast, the clouds hanging low and thick, as if the sky were bearing weight too. At every stop, she forced a smile. Have a great day. She chirped, masking her exhaustion. Customers rarely noticed the fatigue behind her bright green eyes or the tightness in her voice. Around noon, she headed home for a quick break. Quinn was in the living room, half watching TV, half scrolling through his phone. How's the math? She asked casually. He shrugged, not even looking up. Fine, I guess. You guess? Another shrug. Quinn, she said gently, remember our deal? I know, he muttered. I'm just tired. She sat next to him, careful not to push too hard. Me too. But we'll figure it out together. I promise. He looked at her for a beat, and for a moment she saw it, beneath the stoic front, the boy was crumbling. He wanted her there. He just didn't know how to say it anymore. That evening, after dinner, they opened his textbooks and started reviewing math problems. Nora tried her best to explain fractions and equations while stifling yawns and sneaking glances at her clock. She had an evening shift again, this time helping Agnes with her medication schedule. When it was time to leave, she grabbed her bag and kissed Quinn on the top of his head. I'll be back before midnight. You always say that, he said, his voice quiet. Nora paused at the door. I mean it. He didn't respond. The walk to Agnes's house was colder than usual. The sky had darkened to an inky purple, and streetlights flickered on as Nora moved past closed shops and quiet houses. Her breath fogged in the air, and she pulled her coat tighter around her. Agnes greeted her with a warm hug and the usual witty remark. You look like a walking ghost, girl. Sit down before you pass out. They sat on the porch with mugs of tea, and Agnes told her stories from her days as a field nurse in the war, tales of grit, of stubborn hope, of tending wounds with nothing but gauze and determination. I see the same look in your eyes, Agnes said, mid-story. Like you're holding up the world and hoping no one notices you're cracking. Nora didn't reply. You know, the old woman added, no one's giving out medals for burnout. It's okay to rest. It's okay to let someone help you. Nora looked down at her chipped mug. I'm afraid if I stop, everything will fall apart. Agnes reached over and touched her hand. Then build something that won't collapse if you do. That night, Nora returned home past midnight. Quinn had left a lamp on in the kitchen and a sticky note by the sink. You were right about dividing fractions. Thanks. Q. She smiled, folded the note, and tucked it into her journal. But her smile faded the next morning. She came home early from an afternoon shift and found Quinn in his room, curled in the corner with his head buried in his hoodie. His eyes were red. "Quinn?" she asked, rushing to his side. I feel like you're never really here," he said, voice shaking. "You're always working or studying or leaving. I know you're doing your best, but I miss you." The words struck like a blow to her ribs. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I thought I was doing what was right." "I know," he said. "I just want my sister back." That night, Nora sat alone in the living room, staring at the ceiling. Agnes's words replayed in her head, "Build something that won't collapse if you do." She made a decision. The next day, she arrived at Agnes's home and gently explained that she needed to step back, at least for now. Agnes's expression was calm, but Nora could see the disappointment in her eyes. "You're doing the right thing," Agnes said quietly, squeezing her hand. "Quinn needs you more than I do." "I'll still visit," Nora promised. "Your family now." They embraced for a long time. When Nora finally left, the chill in the air felt sharper, not from regret, but from the ache of letting go. Over the next week, she rearranged her world. She cut back on shifts, budgeted more carefully, and carved out real time for Quinn. They started studying together every Sunday, and slowly, his grades began to climb. They laughed more. Watched old sci-fi reruns. Made pancakes without burning them, usually. But despite the new balance, Nora couldn't shake the worry. Bills still loomed. Tuition deadlines edged closer. And she missed Agnes more than she expected. Yet for the first time in months, there was peace in the apartment. The kind that came not from silence, but from presence. One evening, as they sat doing homework at the kitchen table, Quinn looked up and said, "Thanks for being here." She blinked back tears. "Always." Outside, the wind howled. But inside, the world held still. It had been nearly 2 months since Nora stepped away from her evening job with Agnes, and though her evenings were now filled with math problems, burnt toast, and laughter from Quinn's sudden obsession with parody documentaries, a part of her felt missing. Agnes. Every Sunday, Nora still visited the old woman, true to her word. She brought tea, grocery items Agnes requested in tidy notes, and news from the world outside. The apartment always smelled faintly of lavender and worn books, and Agnes always greeted her with the same twinkling eyes and half-sarcastic quips. "Still dragging your little brother through algebra, I hope?" "Trying," Nora would say with a grin. "He's more stubborn than an empty fridge." The hours they spent together felt slower now, more tender. They shared more silences, comfortable ones, the kind only people who truly know each other can sit inside without feeling the urge to fill. Nora would braid Agnes's soft, thinning hair and listen to her stories, the same stories sometimes, told with slightly different details. One afternoon, Agnes handed Nora a small, velvet pouch. "Open it when you're ready," she said, voice soft but serious. "Not before." Nora blinked, confused. "What is it?" "A reminder. Of who you are. And where you're going." Nora tried to protest, but Agnes only sipped her tea and changed the subject. Later, as Nora walked home in the early dusk, she tucked the pouch in her coat pocket, the weight of it curiously comforting. She didn't open it. A week later, it happened. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, just after Nora had finished a clinical rotation. Her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize, and her chest tightened before she even answered. "Is this Nora Everhart?" "Yes," she said, breath caught. "This is St. Alden's Medical. I'm sorry to inform you that Agnes Moore was brought in this morning. She suffered a fall." Nora's legs gave out. She had to sit on a bench outside the hospital, her hands trembling. "She didn't make it," the nurse continued gently. "She passed peacefully. Her neighbor said you were the emergency contact." Nora didn't hear the rest. Just static. Just memories. Just loss. She raced to the hospital, but the bed was already empty. Her fingers gripped the rails as if doing so could rewind time. Agnes was gone. The grief hit harder than she expected, not like a storm, but like a deep ocean rising inside her, silent and steady, until she couldn't breathe. Agnes had been more than a client. She had been a piece of stability, a tether to a version of life that didn't ask her to carry everything alone. She had been family. The funeral was simple. Few people came. Agnes had outlived most of her friends, and her family was scattered, uninterested or simply unavailable. Nora sat in the back, wearing a black dress borrowed from a neighbor, hands clutched tightly in her lap. Quinn held her hand throughout. "She loved you," he said afterward. "You were probably the best part of her life at the end." That night, as she sat on the floor of their apartment, she remembered the velvet pouch. With trembling hands, Nora pulled the drawstrings and reached inside. It was a key. Attached to it was a folded note in Agnes's delicate handwriting. "In the hallway closet of my apartment, top shelf, wooden box. Yours. You'll know why." The next morning, Nora returned to the now quiet apartment. She used the key to enter, her heart taking with every step. The hallway closet was just as Agnes described, dusty, narrow, full of forgotten umbrellas and unused linens. Nora climbed up onto a stool and reached the top shelf. The box was small, oak-colored, and neatly locked. She found the tiny key taped beneath it. Inside? A stack of letters. A few photographs of a younger Agnes in uniform. And beneath it all, a manila envelope with Nora's name written in bold cursive. She opened it with shaking hands. Inside was a letter. "My dear Nora. You have been the light of my final years. I don't have many people left, and I've lived long enough to know that the people we choose matter just as much, if not more, than the ones we're born with. You've given me laughter, warmth, and purpose when I thought the world had forgotten me. I've left instructions with my lawyer. What little savings I have, what's left of my pension and a few inheritance shares, will be transferred into a trust. For you. For your brother. I know it's not millions, but it should give you breathing room. A place to rest. A way to finish your studies without burning yourself to ash. You took care of me when you didn't have to. That's worth more than money. Love always. Agnes." Nora sat still for a long time. When she finally returned home, her hands still clutched the letter like a lifeline. She told Quinn everything, about the pouch, the note, the gift. He didn't say much, just hugged her tightly and whispered, "She knew you deserved it." A week later, they met with Agnes's lawyer. It turned out the savings were more substantial than Nora had ever imagined. Between investments and family holdings, Agnes had quietly built a small fortune over decades. The trust provided for tuition, a new apartment, and a monthly stipend for living expenses. There was one stipulation: Nora had to promise to complete her medical assistant program and pursue her nursing license. She signed the papers with tears in her eyes. Their new apartment was modest but warm, a second-story unit with sunlit windows and working heat. Quinn got his own room. The fridge wasn't empty anymore. There were bookshelves. A small dining table. Peace. That night, Nora stood at the window, watching the city glow. Agnes was gone. But her presence lingered, in the softness of the new sheets, in the quiet hum of the heater, in the steady path of the girl who had carried too much for too long and was now finally allowed to rest. And dream. It was a mild Saturday afternoon, nearly a year since Agnes had passed, and spring had begun to tease the city with the scent of jasmine and the rustle of warm breezes through open windows. Nora stood in the kitchen of their new apartment, hair tied messily atop her head, guiding Quinn through a particularly tricky math problem. He was doing better, more focused, more present. The sullen weight that had once dulled his spirit had begun to lift. Their home echoed not with silence, but laughter, music, and the occasional sibling squabble about chores. Nora herself had transformed. No longer delivering food from dawn until dusk, she now studied full-time, supported by the trust Agnes had left behind. She volunteered part-time at the hospital and excelled in her medical assistant program. Her face still bore the fine lines of sleepless nights past, but her eyes were brighter, her shoulders lighter. She was finally breathing. They were reviewing algebraic expressions when a sharp knock interrupted them. Nora glanced at the door. It was unexpected, no deliveries, no guests planned. "Be right back," she said, smoothing her sweater. When she opened the door, the air seemed to still. Standing before her was a man in a sharply tailored navy suit, tall and composed, but with a guarded sadness in his eyes. He was perhaps in his mid-30s, with a presence that made the hallway feel smaller. His gaze locked with hers, and something in his expression shifted, like a ghost passing through his memories. "Nora Everhart?" he asked, voice low, almost unsure. "Yes?" There was a pause. The stranger's eyes seemed to flicker over her features, not in judgment, but recognition. "My name is Julian Hale," he said, extending a hand. "I'm Agnes Moore's grandson." The name hit her like a bell. "Oh," she whispered, shaking his hand instinctively, her pulse quickening. "I'm sorry for dropping in like this," Julian continued, "but I've been trying to find the right time to speak with you." Nora stepped aside, gesturing toward the small, sunlit living room. "Please, come in." Quinn looked up from the kitchen, wide-eyed. Nora nodded at him. "It's okay. Just a visitor." Julian walked into the room, taking it all in, the modest furniture, the family photos, the smell of cinnamon from the loaf baking in the oven. "It's nice here," he said. Nora smiled politely, nervous. "Can I get you something? Tea?" "Sure. Tea would be nice." As she prepared it, Julian sat on the edge of the couch, staring at a framed photo on the bookshelf. It was one of Nora and Agnes, taken a few months before her passing. They were on a park bench, laughing over something lost to time. "She used to talk about you," he said quietly. "In every call, every letter. Said you were the daughter she never had." Nora poured the tea with trembling hands. "She was like family to me. More than I can say." Julian took the cup with both hands. "I need to apologize. For not being there. For how absent we were, how I was. I thought I had time." "You weren't the only one," Nora said gently. "But she never blamed you." He nodded, eyes clouded with guilt. "Still, I missed her final days. And then, after she passed, I didn't know how to process it. I thought coming here sooner would make it worse. But recently, I found her journals. Letters she wrote. Notes about you and your brother. About how proud she was of you." Nora sat down, quietly listening. "She wrote that you reminded her of herself, fierce, determined, kind. That knowing you gave her peace." Nora blinked back the sudden burn behind her eyes. Julian reached into his coat and pulled out a folded letter. The envelope was yellowed at the corners, the ink faded slightly. "She wrote this for you. I found it in her things. I think she meant to send it." Nora took it with reverence, fingers shaking as she opened the flap and began to read. "My Nora. If you're reading this, then I suppose my time came sooner than expected. But please don't grieve too long. I've had a full life, and your light was one of the brightest things in it. I see so much of myself in you, and yet, you've grown into something far better. You carry kindness like a lantern in a storm. Never let the world convince you it's a burden. I've made arrangements that I hope bring you comfort, but never forget, it wasn't what you did for me that mattered most. It was who you were. You reminded me what it felt like to be seen, heard, and valued. That is a priceless gift. With love. Agnes." By the time she finished, Nora was crying. Julian sat in silence, giving her space. After a long moment, she looked up. "Thank you. For bringing this." He nodded. "There's more. My family, well, what's left of it, wanted to do something. Something in her name. We're setting up a foundation, a scholarship fund for students pursuing nursing or caregiving roles. I'd like to ask if we could name the first grant in your honor." Nora was stunned. "You don't have to." "We want to," he said firmly. It's what she would have wanted. Nora looked around her apartment, at the quiet whir of Quinn's laughter in the background, the framed photos, the couch where Agnes once sat when she visited. Her life had changed in so many ways since that first delivery shift, yet in this moment, everything felt connected. "I'd be honored," she said softly. Julian smiled. Then it settled. They talked a while longer, about Agnes, about caregiving, about second chances. And when Julian finally stood to leave, he paused at the door. "She said you'd change lives, you know." Nora smiled through her tears. "She already changed mine." He nodded once, then turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps echoing softly. Nora closed the door and leaned against it, clutching the letter to her chest. Outside, The sun dipped below the skyline, casting golden streaks across the floor. Agnes was gone, but her legacy lived on, not in bank accounts or trust funds, but in the kindness she inspired and the strength she left behind. Nora folded the letter carefully and placed it beside her study notes. Then she walked back to the kitchen. "Ready for round 2 of algebra?" she asked, her voice light again. Quinn grinned. "Only if you make more cinnamon bread." "Deal." A year had passed since Julian Hale's unexpected visit, and life for Nora Everhart had settled into something she never thought she'd experience again: stability. Not wealth, not luxury, but enough. Enough to rest without guilt. Enough to learn without sacrifice. Enough to live. Their apartment, once a quiet shelter from hardship, had become a space of growth and light. The walls bore new photographs: Quinn's science fair ribbon, Nora's acceptance letter into the nursing program, even a framed copy of the scholarship certificate named in her honor, the Agnes Moore Award for Compassionate Care. Every time she passed it, Nora smiled. It was spring again, and a warm breeze danced through the open window. The scent of fresh basil from their tiny windowsill garden wafted through the kitchen where Nora sat, textbooks open, highlighters scattered, a coffee mug half full. Across the table, Quinn was hunched over his own homework, geometry now. His posture had improved, his hoodie sleeves no longer threadbare, and his once weary eyes now sparkled with purpose. "Hey," he said, glancing up, "can I ask you something weird?" Nora looked up from her notes, amused. "Weird is our family brand. Go ahead. Do you think we're, like, done with the hard parts? Of life, I mean." The question caught her off guard. She leaned back, thinking. "I don't think life ever stops being hard," she said slowly. "But I think we've gotten stronger. Smarter. And we're not alone anymore. That makes all the difference." He nodded thoughtfully. "Just feels weird. Not worrying all the time." "That's called peace," she said with a soft laugh. "You're allowed to feel it." Later that afternoon, they took a walk to the community park near their apartment. It was Earth Day, and the local council had organized a neighborhood garden event. Children planted flowers, families painted stones, and volunteers mulched fresh soil into newly formed garden beds. Nora stood with her sleeves rolled up, helping a group of elderly women plant daffodils. She guided their hands gently, reminded them when to bend their knees and when to let someone else lift the heavier pots. It felt natural. Second nature. Julian appeared a little later, carrying a tray of refreshments. Though he and Nora hadn't grown particularly close, they had built a quiet partnership, linked by legacy, driven by shared purpose. He helped organize the scholarship fund, ensuring its reach expanded to neighboring cities, and had made it his mission to honor Agnes's name through service, not just structure. "Are you ready for next month's seminar?" he asked Nora as he handed her a bottle of water. "Almost," she replied. "I've never spoken at a medical ethics conference before. But Agnes always said kindness was the best practice there is. I think that'll be my angle. She'd love that." Nora smiled, eyes scanning the garden. Quinn was laughing with another teen, helping lay down stepping stones between flower beds. It was a different kind of richness, this life. Not defined by dollars or square footage, but by time, connection, purpose, and the quiet knowledge that the seeds she'd sown in hard seasons were finally blooming. Later that night, as golden light spilled through the windows, Nora curled up on the couch with a warm blanket and her nursing textbook. Quinn sat nearby with a sketchpad in his lap, drawing futuristic cityscapes and little comics featuring a sibling duo who saved the world between math tests and ramen dinners. "Hey," he said suddenly, "do you remember when we didn't have a couch?" Nora laughed. "I remember sitting on the floor with a blanket and a pillow pretending it was a sofa. We still ate better meals back then," he teased. "Your first lentil stew was a war crime. Blame the recipe. I was a victim too." They dissolved into laughter, deep, healing, uncontrollable. And then silence. But not the heavy kind. The peaceful kind. Later, before bed, Nora stood at her bedroom window, holding the letter Agnes had written. It lived in a shadow box now, beside a photograph of the two of them. She read the final lines once more. "You carry kindness like a lantern in a storm. Never let the world convince you it's a burden. She closed her eyes and whispered softly, "I won't." That night, she dreamed of gardens. Of wind in her hair and hands in the soil. Of warmth and love and all the little things that once seemed impossible. She dreamed of the future not as a battle, but as a promise. And when the morning came, Nora Everhart rose again, not out of survival, but joy. She was no longer just carrying the weight of her world. She was building something better.